go, here we go, here we go. Good evening. Welcome to Black Star, Still Rising. And I am your host and executive producer, Stephen Black Butterfly Carter. Glad to be with you today. And I can't do anything before I start to mention the Black Star Project. And Gloria Smith, the executive director, who has been following in the footsteps of the late Philip Jackson, the founder of the Black Star Project. And what does he say? And it's going to have some relevance for today's program. Educate or die. Educate or die, right?
Yes.
Yeah. This face looks familiar to it. We're going to get back to it. I know this person, Dr. Mike. You're getting to know Dr. Mike. He's going to be as famous as Dr. Oz one day. And you'll hear more from him very directly about some things that are impacting us now and what we've talked about for over the past 3-4 months. And that is dementia.
Yes. Well, thank you.
We're going to talk about that a little bit later.
Sure.
I better do these shout-outs, right?
Oh, please,
Okay,
give everybody their props.
Okay.
Yes,
I got to shout out, first of all, to Amani and Rocio, our studio producers, that make all this happen and make things go smoothly for us. Then I've got to touch bases and talk about the directors of the various programs at Black Star Project. And I want to shout out to Justin Douglas, director of the programs that are going on. We're going to talk about one of those programs. We're going to talk about the other programs that are coming up, and I'm going to talk about that right now. And shout out to Brother Douglas, and the announcement is for the Ambassadors of Hope program that's been going on for the last few weeks. And I've got a phone number for you because they're going to have a program.
Get your pen.
Hey, you reminded me. I think I appreciate that. Get your pen and paper. I thought you will. Get that pen and paper out and start taking notes on this.
I got some numbers too, so get your pen right now.
Got a phone number here. I got a phone number for you. 773-285. 9600. If you need to find out some more information about the Black Star Project and programs, call there, and any of the folks who answer the phone will be able to give you some more information about the Ambassadors of Hope program next Monday, and you'll see what these young men have done and what they are doing and what they have produced of value to the community. You'll hear about that.
Can you give them that number one more time?
Yes. 773
773
285, you're right?
285, yeah.
9600.
9600. Okay.
I can't go any further unless I also talk about my producer, my associate producer, and that is Ellis Taylor. He makes things happen on the social media platforms, and of course, when he's not wearing his white smock, Dr. Mike has been the producer for guest engagement. Identify all the right people and the right things to be talked about, and the things that you tell us, our audience tells us, that you want us to address, or to have guests in that address some of these things. Now, I'll give you a little hint. There's a Democratic National Convention coming to Chicago next month.
Really?
It's some things that, and I can say this on an nonpartisan basis, there are things that we need to know, things that you must, as Philip would say, educate or die. I'm going to bring to you some people that can give you the information that you need to be able to make wise choices, whatever way that is, but about how our system of government works. And one of the things that we have not addressed effectively in our communities, in the country, is civics. Civics.
That's no longer taught in school,
Civics
is it?
101. I had to take a test, I think, in 7th grade or 8th grade, or to graduate from grammar school to high school in civics. And there are things that we're going to talk about that come up in conversations with many of our guests who catch me on the street, etc., and have questions about. We're going to talk about that a little bit later on. So, without any further ado, I'm going to talk to Dr. Mike, and what he's been talking about for the last few weeks, over months, is how dementia affects him, family, friends, etc., and has maybe some implications in the recent events of the past week that we have now a new candidate for President of the United States.
Well,
Dr. Mike.
once again, thank you back, Butterfly. It's my pleasure to be back on the show. Like I said, continuing our series on dementia. We've talked in the past, and please go when you get a chance to look at the previous sessions. We talked about dementia from the patient perspective.
And how do they find out about it? Is that YouTube that they have to go and they can get any of your past and previous shows?
Black Star Still Rising.
Okay.
All of those things are there. So you can go and just type in on YouTube, go to Black Star Still Rising. You can see some of the previous segments if you didn't get a chance to look at them already. And some things you can look over because sometimes when you watch things, you miss some things. So I would say
Especially
take a
if you're
double
not
take.
taking notes.
Yeah. And so, like I said, we talked about dementia from the patient perspective. We talked about it from the caregiver perspective, which, of course, for some of you all, this might be your first time tuning in. I'm actually dealing with dementia in real time. My mother has recently been diagnosed with vascular dementia, and my mother-in-law has Alzheimer's.
Okay.
And so,
Now, what's the difference between the two? Can you share that with the audience?
sure.
Yeah.
Let me just before I even go into those two, let me just clarify something that I was talking to a very educated person the other day, and they thought that dementia and Alzheimer's were synonymous.
Okay.
And in fact, that dementia is the umbrella, and the types of dementia are under that. For example, if I say a person has cancer,
Yes.
you're going to ask me what?
Which cancer?
What type?
Okay.
And so when a person has dementia, you need to know what type. And so there are several types. Alzheimer's is the most prevalent. Of 67% of people who have dementia have Alzheimer's. And
What's different about that?
Mm-hmm.
What makes the difference in saying that's Alzheimer's versus dementia?
well, Alzheimer's is basically a lack of nutrients that affect the brain.
Okay.
There are cells, and you have plaque, just like you have plaque on your teeth. You have plaque on your brain cells, and that stops the transmission of information. I always call it like a little bridge, like information has to go across the bridge. And so when there's plaque on those neurons and the synapses, the bridges that information jumps across, like boom, 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 boom. When that gets clogged up, then your thoughts are clogged as well.
Okay.
And then also there are tau proteins that have tangles in them. And so both of those things are the things that Alzheimer's patients are affected with. It's you know that because there are general signs like beginning to forget. You know, we all, as we get older, we mature, we
Got where our
forget.
car keys are. and
Yeah.
things like- okay.
But when you're what they call activities of daily living, which means eating, taking care of your bills, using the bathroom and those things, when those things begin to become affected, then you know something is wrong.
Something that you can observe that
Right.
in a loved one.
And the
that-
loved ones are the first ones to see that. Before anywhere you get anywhere near the doctor, your loved ones are going to notice that you might miss your appointments, or you might begin to not be able to handle your business, your banking. You know, the sequence, all those things have sequences. And so when you have Alzheimer's, those things are very noticeable. But now that's Alzheimer's. Vascular dementia is the second most prevalent type of dementia, and that's the type of dementia that my mom has. As we were talking on our way here in the car, vascular dementia is more a lack of oxygen that's getting to the small blood vessels in your brain. If you imagine a tree, you got a big stem, the bottom, then it goes up and up and up into the little branches. So there's a lack of oxygen getting to those cells.
Is that part curable in some way, or is it something physically you can do?
Well, you can. That's normally
Not
caused
cure,
by
but maybe
blood
address it
pressure,
some way.
diabetes, all the things that cause lack of oxygen to get like any place else in your body. But when it affects the brain cells, then there, once again, the signs of that are similar to Alzheimer's, in that what Alzheimer's is plaque and tangles in the brain cells.
I want you to hit two things, and this is a recap of some of the things you've talked about, some of the other guests I've talked about. How does it affect the caregiver, you? And how does that relationship between the caregiver and the person who needs care, how is that being maneuvered or danced with?
It's a very, very delicate dance because normally, no matter what type of dementia you have, the first thing is that your loved one is in denial
Okay.
because they just think, oh, maybe I'm getting old and, I forgot something. And that's natural. I've gone into a room and forgot what I went into the room for.
You went to the refrigerator? How
Yeah.
many? Raise your hand out there. You went to the refrigerator
Yeah.
and had to retrace your steps to find out, what did I go to the refrigerator for?
But see, that's the thing about the difference between just normal aging and dementia. You have the ability to rewind that in your mind. And if you just sat there for a minute, two, I did that the other day. I was like, what did I come in for? I was like, oh, I'm looking for such and such. But people with dementia
That sounds so familiar.
don't have the ability to do that.
Uh-huh.
And that's why that we know that dementia, from some of the research I've done, is just not a normal process of aging. It's a lack of nutrients that the brain needs in order to survive, just like all the rest of the cells in our body need nutrients to survive.
So, Dr. Mike, when some of these things start to happen, what are resources for a person, our viewers here today,
Okay.
that you would recommend or say they should start to do some research, etc.? Where would they be?
Well, get your pen and paper out. I'm going to give you a few places of resources that I've had to use. Like I said, I'm dealing with this in real time, day to day. The first number I'm going to give you is the Alzheimer's Association. They have a wonderful 24-hour hotline that if you have questions, you and or your loved one, I've actually have gotten on the call with my mom and myself to discuss some things. Because like I said, that person is in denial, so they really don't want to know too much. But it's always good to have a third party, interject into your relationship. It's like a mediator because they're going through things. And like I said, understand that your loved ones are not giving you a hard time. They're having a hard time.
Okay.
And so let me give you this first number. It's 1-800-272-3900.
For those who weren't paying attention, Dr. Mike, give that again, please.
1-800-272-3900. And that's the Alzheimer's Association. Like I said, they have a 24-hour hotline. Sometimes they do get busy and they will call you back. Because I called one day, I had some questions from the caregiver perspective, and they just told me to leave my number. Within the hour, they called me back and answered all the questions I had. They're very, very good. The next number is the Department of Aging. Department of Aging is 1-800-252-8966. Again, that's 1-800-252-8966.
Is that a city agency?
Yes, the
Okay.
Department of Aging. And it's,
Okay.
yeah, this is Chicago. These are Chicago branches. And then you have the Chicago Senior Services, which is very good because I've noticed that even though I'm a pharmacist, I've had a very difficult time navigating this whole journey because there's so much information that you don't know that you need, and you're trying to understand somebody's mind. It's difficult to just interact with people's mind that's there's nothing wrong with them and understanding where they're coming from. But to deal with somebody with dementia is much, much greater than my 30 years of experience. It has nothing. It did nothing for that.
You mentioned one thing always stood out for me. You talked about meeting them where they are.
Yeah. Hold on. Let me give that number for the Chicago Senior Services.
Okay,
I didn't give
please,
that
yes,
number out.
yeah.
That number is 312-744-4016.
One more time.
312-744-4016. That's Chicago Senior Services. All three of these resources, I've called these people to the point where they know who I am when I call.
Dr. Mike calls. They didn't listen.
Well,
They
not just
respond.
just because I called them so much. It's not because I'm Dr. Mike, because I'm reaching out.
Okay.
And you need help. This is a journey that it's beyond the scope of my practice. And I've been a pharmacist for 30 years. And none of my clinical experience has helped. It's just that I'm walking by faith at this time.
Let me ask this, and this kind of leads into our next area. That we're really going to talk about civic lessons.
Yeah.
And that was many of us, our viewers now, probably saw the debate that'll be talked about for ages.
Yes.
And that there were signs that there were some issues, if I can put it that way,
Yeah.
with the president. And What did you see when you watched it, and how did you relate that to some of the things you're experiencing or think you're experiencing?
Well, when I was watching it, I could see where President Biden was trying to put things in order because, of course, prior to that, he sat down and they went through a list of things that, in categories and names and all that stuff. But when you have somewhat of cognitive decline, it's very difficult to put things in order. Like we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. When you have dementia, you might go 1, 3, 5.
Will go out of order. It won't be the sequential
You get stuck.
things. Okay.
It's called a loop where, like I said, the messages are trying to go, and this happens very, very super fast in your brain, like in milliseconds. And so if it's like a Christmas tree. If you got a short in it, some of those lights will go out. Now the rest of the lights will be on. And it was clear that he was having some difficulty and just flowing. That's the thing that you lose. It's a rhythm, just like we all have a rhythm of when we talking, and then if I just was talking, then all of a sudden I paused. Because
and talking about that pause, that gave many of us, and we're not trying, and Dr. Mike is not trying to give you a medical diagnosis of what we think many of us thought that we witnessed in watching that.
Yeah, and let me
debate.
be clear. I'm not saying that he has any type of dementia, but it's some type of cognitive decline that we all saw with our eyes. And even if you don't know anything about dementia, if you're in a conversation with somebody and they begin to kind of drift off, or they're not concentrating and making not sense, but just flowing with you in the conversation, you would automatically think there's something going on with them. And let me be clear that he has not been diagnosed with anything to this point, because I've done some research and I even looked today to see, what was the update.
Okay.
But that's something that, that's his personal business. So I wouldn't expect anyone to just be telling that man's business to us, because that's a very personal thing that he and his family will have to deal with before that's even ever going to be, diagnosed. Because my mom had some signs and symptoms for many, many months before we just went on the, like last week, to get the actual diagnosis. That requires a CAT scan and an MRI to look and see what's going on.
And actually, the point of what we saw was not so much that we had a diagnosis, but it raised alarms. It raised red flags.
Yeah.
Was the appearance of dementia or declining cognitive was going to make a difference. And with all those happening all over probably a week's period of time, all that happening, what folks saw and the impressions and how it was going to impact this next election, that's where things start to come together. But one of the things, and we'll get back to some of the phone calls that folks need to make, is it reminded me that there are questions being asked that have civics implications, things that we should know, we should be aware of, but many people are not aware of the mechanics, and I'm not going to say machinations of government, but the mechanics of government. We talked about the branches of government and how they intertwine. We're talking about the legislative, which is the president. We're talking about the executive, which is the president. We're talking about the legislative, which is the Senate and the House. And we're talking about the other branch, and that's the judiciary, the Supreme Court, and how those all intertwine and how we should be aware of how it works. And that's going to determine what we put as priorities when we're identifying, selecting our leaders. And that's not just on the national basis.
On the local level.
When we talk about locally and state, which we all have, and all politics are local. When we have these things to consider, the federal government is somewhat of a template. On each state, you have an executive branch, a governor. You have a judicial branch, which is the judicials, the courts, etc. And you have the legislative part, which is our state representatives and our state senators. That we must be aware of what happens and how we have to do with this. How many of us know anything about the Electoral College? how many of us really know and understand that our presidents are not elected by majority? It's by the Electoral College.
Mm-hmm.
We need to know, and I'm going to be bringing people on board here, sit right here
Yeah.
where you're sitting today, so that we can break some of this down.
Well, we
So
kind of gotten away from that to the point that I talk to a lot of my friends, and people are really not engaged in politics as they used to be.
and they have to be engaged in the
And they're
things that
apathetic.
affects their life.
Let me share a couple more things in terms of just points that I think are important. And you had asked me that, and then we moved on. But like I said, understand that once again that your loved ones are not giving you a hard time; they're having a hard time, and understand that you do not have the tools to fix them. You know, just like if you're going to do something, do some repair in your home, if you don't have the tools, you can't fix what's wrong.
Their light fixer or their plumbing issue or whatever. Okay.
And most people, you're thrust into this position. This is not something that you signed up for or your loved one signed up for. And you have to understand that you've been thrust in this position, and you have to have the most patience of Job and whoever, the patience, understanding. You gotta learn a new language. It's almost like learning a new language. Their emotional new language that you're dealing with. And they begin to listen to your tone and look in your face, and they can tell that when you're agitated. So you try to be normal, and you got to smile through a lot of things. And that's the key.
Give some of those phone numbers again, please.
Let me give you a number again. That Alzheimer's Association, again, for those who might just tuned in, is 1-800-272-3900. That's a 24-hour hotline. And the Department of Aging, again, is 1-800-252-8966. And the Chicago Senior Services is 312-744-4016. Let me give another stat. As of 2023, there are 6.7 million people that are affected by dementia. And what do you think that's going to be by the year 2030?
I'm afraid to ask.
It's going to be 12.7. And that's just of the people that they know of. So imagine the number of people that in our community that are living with this condition in silence. Because I remember a time, they used to call people, they was like, oh, he was just senile or something back in the day. Because dementia, we didn't use that term. They used more negative terms.
And I got to jump in here quickly because we only have a few minutes left.
Yeah.
On a very nonpartisan basis, I saw a broadcast last night that Roland Martin, the very astute journalist, had put on the air, and folks began to know why they needed to be involved, engaged in this next election. And he brought together people from the Divine Nine. I'm Alp, and I have to say that I'm part of that group. That we know that there's something that we must contribute to this next election. Not saying who you should vote for, who you shouldn't vote for.
Yeah.
But we all have to be engaged in some way and know how the judicial system, how our legislative system works, and what we must do. I want to give you one thought that one of the people up for election said a number of years ago when the judicial part was being discussed. And one of the Supreme Court justices was being questioned. She asked him, can you think of any laws that give government the power to make decisions about the male body? I'm going to read that once more. Can you think of any laws that give the power to government to make decisions about the male body? And one other quote from our Constitution. All men are created equal in the Constitution. But back then, they made no mention of women, did they? They made no mention of the enslaved, that they were equal. But it is important now that women, even more so, know that they are equal part and maybe more of an equal part of what's going to be happening over the next few years in our government.
Yeah.
All men are created equal, but they were less equal. It's only been recently that women could vote. Golly.
Well, like we were talking about earlier, people, sometimes you might not like the candidates, but people in the past have died in order for us to have the right to vote. So even though you might not like,
Either one of the
choices,
candidates, Yes.
But I feel like I have a civic responsibility because people gave up their lives for this, and it's very important, and it changes the future of our generations. You know, my great grandkids and down the line. It's going to change. It's going to affect them.
And I'm wrapping up this with saying that you must look for the coming weeks. We will have some people that will be able to break down how the system works and what your part is, how you engage at every level of government, from the federal to these next elections coming up, but also at the state, from governor to dog catcher.
What is that? They used to say we learned it. When we were young. Conjunction junction. What's your function? So please get out and vote. It's very, very important. And
I'm going to repeat what Philip Jackson said. It applies now. Educate or die. Educate or die. And that means it's so important. Now, we've got to educate ourselves. Let me be a part of educating or bringing people to you who have that expertise to break things down so we know how the system works. If we know how the systems work, we can kick that door open and walk in.
Knowledge is power.
Knowledge is power. You said it all.
Knowledge is
I
power.
want to thank you, Dr. Mike, for coming
always
today.
my pleasure.
You've been bringing some valuable information to us today, and you're always appreciated. I'm going to give you this number again for the Black Star. The number is 773-285-9600. Black Star Project. Call there. They'll let you know what's happening on the many programs that are intergenerational.
And again, it's always my pleasure to share knowledge. Knowledge is to be shared, not to be hoarded.
And I'm your host, Stephen Black Butterfly Carter. Look for us next Tuesday, same time. Tell them, Viva Voce, pass it on.
Pass it
5:30 to 5:55. Look for us on Tuesdays. Got somebody exciting? I can't tell you next. I can't tell you now who's going to be next week.
Okay.
I gave you got a hint of it.
Okay, all
And
right.
this is a wrap, I think.
All right.
Okay, thank you.